Welcome to another episode of the Dentology podcast, where we discuss the business of dentistry. In this podcast series, we'll be discussing all the non-clinical aspects of dentistry, from goodwill values, finance, marketing, how to buy and sell a dental practice, mindset, through to where you can invest your money in team management issues. My name is Andy Acton, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Strevens. Let's jump straight into it. So welcome to this latest episode of Dentology, the Business of Dentistry podcast. And today, Chris and I are going to be talking about the common pitfalls of selling a dental practice, of which there are many.
And they are common and they are pitfalls.
Yeah, and I suppose the start point on this is because most people only ever sell one dental practice, they're learning as they go. And they don't mean to sometimes make these mistakes, they just don't know. And hopefully by us sharing the things that we've seen over the years, it means that people won't make the mistakes themselves.
I think what it is sometimes people just don't understand the process, and also they don't necessarily understand the implications of doing or not doing.
Yeah.
Because they just don't think it's that important. But the reality of it is it can be majorly important.
Yeah.
And once you've sort of committed, it can cause you real grief. So if you can actually do it and think about it and plan it before you start that path, it's a bit like, isn't it? What's that great thing that, remember we used to work at that bank, and because it was an Irish bank, they'd say, if you wanted to, you wouldn't ask the bloke in Dublin how to get to Cork, and you'd sort of then say, well, which road, where are you starting from? The answer is you've got to have a journey plan, otherwise you could be starting from anywhere,
the wrong place.
It'll be the wrong place.
Yeah. Well, let's kick off with one. So one of the common pitfalls is right at the beginning, people don't get a valuation, and I know that sounds really basic and obvious, but the amount of people that will speak to their accountant or speak to their friend, or look at other practices that might be for sale and base their valuation on that. But every dental practice is unique. And we always say, whether people use Frank Taylor and Associates or not, it doesn't really matter. You should be getting an independent valuation so you know what your practice is worth.
You wouldn't do it, would you? I think I say to people, if someone knocks on your door at home and said, I'm going to offer you 500,000, £1 million, whatever your house value you think it is, you wouldn't say, oh, that's all right.
No.
You'd go on to Zoopla or On the Market or Right Move or whatever it is and have a look. But you can't do that with dental practices because they are so unique. And the only way that you would really or should do it is get a proper valuation. I mean, I've got two stories. I just did a valuation for someone who we valued the practice that they bought. They bought for 250 from a man, and it's now worth about 600 because the man didn't get a valuation. Because I think also, and I don't know what you think, is it because no matter what people say about practice values and how strong they are, some people don't believe it, so therefore they sort of think, well, actually I can't believe it would be worth 600,000, so 250 seems a good value.
And as a buyer, you want to buy for the best price possible, and if you've approached somebody and they're uninformed, they will go with what you tell them. And I suppose going back to the valuation, that's where the up-to-date comparables matter as well, to make sure that your valuation is based on what's happening now, because a value a year ago or 2 years ago or pre-COVID would be very different to where we are now. And as we've come through COVID, lots of practices have improved their performance. With that, their values increased as well.
But also I think that the other thing on that, isn't it, that some practices, because of what they are not worth as much as they were before, because the buyers have changed some of their parameters as to where they want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something else where people struggle, and a common pitfall, is where they have a lack of up-to-date financial information. So they haven't kept their figures up to date. So the information they're using to present to a buyer or for the valuation could be a year, 18 months out of date. And given the period we've been through, and given that dental practices weren't legally allowed to operate between the 23rd of March 2020 and the 8th of June, that's a black hole. And if you don't have information available post that, so we can get a good idea what that looks like, you're then going to be in a situation where you may not be getting fair value for your business because you might not be working to the most current information available.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because there's been so much upheaval in the last 2 years, hasn't it? I mean, do you remember? I don't know if you, and I'm sure it was just a minor blip by that bank, who on a couple of queries said, "Well, why's the turnover drop?" And we sort of went, "Because they were shut for like 3 months." And they went, "Oh yeah, you're right." And but it's simple things like that. Unless you really know someone who knows what they're talking about and understands it, then, as you say, you could be looking at and basing your value on 9 months' worth of figures. And that's on the assumption that you only did the same as you've done before. And I think, as we have said, and you hear it, and I'm sure people listening, their performances in the main, especially with private fees, has shown a massive change.
Absolutely.
A massive change.
Something else as well, and I'll say 2 words and you'll probably shiver, which is the due diligence. And it's a necessary evil of getting through the sale process. And we've seen where people are on top of managing the due diligence well, they can shave 6, 8, 10 weeks off their transaction time,
at least,
by being organised.
At least, I mean, some people, and yes, we have a due diligence guide, and okay, lawyers can sometimes be a bit irritating in the fact of, you printed it in A to Z, but actually they really quite like it in Z to A, the documentation. Okay, it can be annoying for the lawyers in between, but it's not stuff they don't have. You should be able to find it. You should.
Although you'd be surprised.
Well, I suppose, yeah.
Sometimes we've had cases where people can't find their NHS contract, they can't find their lease, employment contracts. They're here somewhere.
It's true, isn't it? And we're talking about the common pitfalls and things like, if you're coming to sell your practice, then the time to find this stuff out is before you go into the legal say. So if, say, for instance, you haven't got a contract, and we've known a number of cases, haven't we, where they haven't got a contract, and I think it's interesting because we were both involved in dentistry, because we bought Frank Taylor's in 2000, didn't we? And there are people who never seem to have had a contract. So it's not that they've lost it; they've never had one, but they've still been paid. And if you know that at the beginning, then you can be upfront and say, well, we haven't got a contract, but we've been paid for the last 15
and I suppose on a day-to-day
years.
basis, when you're running your business, it kind of doesn't really matter.
No,
because you're being paid. You're delivering on the terms. You know what you need to do. It's only when you go into a sale process and a solicitor says you need to provide this documentation, and if you don't have, let's focus on the NHS contract, which I know is quite unusual, but it has happened. If suddenly you need to go to the LAT and ask for a copy of a contract that would have been created probably back in 2006. We're now talking about something that was 16 years ago.
And also, they have got smaller. So the likelihood or the possibility of it not actually being found by the LAT is pretty strong as well. I say, I'm going to ask a dental principal, can you tell me where your Legionella test certificate, whatever it is, you need? And the answer is, well, it's in a file somewhere, but I don't know where that file is. Well, the answer is find the file. And I think the other thing that I find, everyone wants to be super confidential, don't they, over their practices. And we as human beings notice when things aren't the same, when the rhythm of life changes a bit.
Behaviour changes.
So therefore, you've got some guy who's suddenly, or some girl who's now suddenly scrabbling around and saying to the people, the practice manager, do you know where the staff contracts are? Because the answer is, they've probably never, ever asked that question. So that's an instant thought of the fact, hello, something's going on. So if you can do that before you even really think about it and say, I'm reviewing my CQC, I want to make it more efficient. Because you've got to have these things, the CQC and the law.
Also, I think it just de-stresses the situation. Setting a business is a stressful thing to go through. The more pre-work you can do when you're not in the sale process, the more you can get yourself organised and all your data and information lined up, it just means it's going to be a smoother process all round. And I think also from a buyer's point of view, it kind of indirectly says, I'm on top of my business, I'm in control, it's a well-organised, well-run, well-led business, as opposed to you scrabbling around for information that might take 3 months to find.
Yeah, it's in a drawer somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it shouldn't be, but we know it is. It's a bit like that thing, isn't it? You know, what happens if someone asks me that I'm selling my practice? And we sort of say, well, just come up with a credible answer that sort of says, well, I'm exploring my options, because you haven't sold it. And I think it's that thing, isn't it, of it's just pre-planning. If you plan that someone might ask you that question, then you don't go bright red in the corridor and sort of fluff your lines ready, because you can say, oh, yeah, I'm just considering my options at the moment. And then most people go, oh, okay. it's that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. The danger is you make it look so underhand and dodgy that then you embarrass yourself, you embarrass your team member, and that's when you all start to get a bit worried about what's going on, really.
I think another pitfall that people fall into is which solicitor they use.
What, you mean the one that bought a house?
Yeah, it's the conveyancing solicitor or the family friend or the person that helped their mate buy a hotel. There's endless stories of people using. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure they're very good solicitors. I'm sure in what they do they're good. However, there are many nuances to dentistry, and it's important that you get somebody that understands those nuances, because if something doesn't get covered off in that agreement, and heaven forbid down the road that agreement needs to be pulled out, you want to make sure that as a seller you're protected, the warranties are appropriate and everything's covered out in it. But even if you then go within dental solicitors, it's also important to find you work with somebody who you get on with, because you're going to be working with this person quite closely for several months. So having that kind of relationship between you and your solicitor is important, but also checking their capacity to run your deal.
Definitely. Because
everybody gets busy, and you need to make sure that the person you're working with has the headroom to give you the service.
Yeah, you don't want, you're buying, whether you're buying or selling a practice, when you're selling it, you sort of want it done, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
You don't want someone who says, well, I tell you, I'm really sorry, I'm so busy, I can't do anything for 6 weeks. Because, hang on a minute, that's 6 weeks. And the buyer, remember, wants to get on with this as well. So I must admit, it surprises me when people will accept that. And I think the key thing for me when you look at any of those of the legal contracts is it's not so much what's in it, it's maybe what's not in it. And the thing is, if you've chosen a guy who sold your house or bought your house or did a newsagent or did a hotel, they won't understand dentistry. So you won't have things in the contract.
Yeah.
Which you as a dentist won't know you should have in a contract. I mean, you think of that guy that we had, what was it? I can't remember, it was a while ago, but he used that firm who basically managed to forget to put anything about warranties and indemnities or something. And he ended up wasn't it about a year later, these guys were knocking on his door asking for $100,000 because of poor work or something. And in the end, they agreed on a payment because, one, it was going to be so expensive to go to litigation. Yeah. And two, there was no clear rebuttal or clear defined path within the SPA, the Sale and Purchase Agreement. But he didn't know that because he's a dentist.
And there was another one that was a long time ago where the solicitor obviously didn't have any commercial experience and didn't put anything in the agreement about the finance needing to be discharged for the equipment.
And I forgot about
the
that.
buyer took over, and then obviously the finance didn't continue to be paid, and the debt collectors turned up at the practice and repossessed the equipment.
Yeah, so I remember
and
that.
The seller had since left the country, so there was no recourse back to the seller. So, they're unusual cases, sound kind of quite extreme, but they do happen. They do happen from time to time.
And as you say, you know, as a selling dentist, you're a brilliant dentist. You're a clinician who doesn't really have business training, even if in a way you've developed a really good business mind in your practice. You've probably never sold one, so therefore the implications and what you need within your contract to protect you, you've probably never come across before.
No.
So you probably don't even, it goes back to you don't know what you don't know. And that's where you get yourself in trouble, I think.
Absolutely. I think the other one we were saying about kind of timing your sale in the context of your due diligence and getting your paperwork lined up. But I think there's another area where people kind of trip themselves up in, because they don't plan their sale that far in advance. We get lots of people that come to us who, want a valuation and it's sold within, 3, 4, 6 months. But if you take a slightly longer run up and you can straddle a couple of accounting years, there's going to be some allowances, some unused allowances, tax allowances that you're going to be able to use. That are only available to you while you own a business. So if you can speak to your accountant, financial advisor, us, whoever, and understand what's available to you while you still own a business, it means, one, you're going to ultimately end up with more money than you might have, and that might offset some of the costs related to selling your dental practice.
Well, I'm always amazed at the capital allowances on freehold.
Yeah.
Any of you guys listening either own your commercial freehold or know a friend who owns their commercial freehold, then you have to take note of this one, because you need to check if you have claimed the capital allowance on your freehold. So not on your equipment, fixtures and fittings, but on your freehold. Because typically it works out to be 10% of what you paid for it can be offset against your tax bill. So not a tax allowance, so it's not like depreciation, this is 10% off your tax bill. So you bought a freehold for 500,000, it would probably net down to 50,000. Your tax bill is 100,000. You only pay £50,000 in tax. And I look at it and I think, one, you only pay someone to do it if it's successful. Two, it's sort of money for old rope. And three, it's been around for hundreds of years. But so many people we talk to, they never even heard of it.
And it can only be claimed once, can't it? So if it's been claimed before, you can't claim again. However, lots of properties haven't had it claimed yet.
No. Use it or lose
available.
it. Was it about 2014 or 15 or so? And when you look at that, you think of that one, you're going to be paying legal fees. Okay, you'll be paying commission fees. But at the end of the day, if you could save that in tax, you've actually just paid for everything out of money that you were going to have to spend on tax anyway. So it's a bit free and gratis,
it's
really.
a winner. It's a winner. And that's on the property. That's if you own the property. So that would be a freehold.
Yeah.
If you're selling your dental practice and you don't have the freehold, you would have a leasehold. Make sure you know where the lease is. Get the documentation out. Make sure the lease is in there. But also look at the lease, because when you come to sell, the buyer is going to be interested on the remaining terms of the lease.
Yeah.
So if you've got a 15-year lease, which is great, but you only have 3 years remaining...
What's the question we hate? What's the answer we hate to hear from dentists about their leases?
I have a fabulous relationship with my landlord. Everybody will tell us they have a fabulous relationship with my landlord.
Oh, unbelievable.
The reality is, unfortunately, very often landlords, they're commercial beings, and if the lease is short and if a landlord gets an inkling that needs to be extended for sale, quite often a premium will be payable for that lease to be extended. And I think we've seen premiums of £50,000 to £70,000 paid.
What was that recent one, wasn't it? It was something like a £2 million practice sale, and the landlord got a whiff of this, and I think it was 63,000 or 65,000 to actually extend a lease. And basically, the seller, you're rock and hard place, aren't you? Because on a 3-year lease, you're not going to get £2 million or
no
whatever
lease,
the value
no sale,
yeah,
isn't it? And that's the thing. And it's one of those things, again, going back to that kind of taking a slightly longer term view. You need to make sure, in a perfect world, you'd have plus 10 years remaining on your lease. Between 7 and 10 years starts to get a bit tight. South of that, probably want to start having a conversation with your landlord about getting that lease extended so that it's in good shape, ready for that sale.
And I think what also ties with that, Adam, you mentioned it earlier on, is give yourself a run up. We for years we just said to people, look, if you want to go in 5 years' time, this is the time to build your practice, because everybody sniffs one really good year.
Yeah.
And we discount one really good year.
Yeah.
What they want to see is a consistency of income. So If you want to go in 3 years, 5 years, then spend your time building your practice, getting all your due diligence together, getting all your processes right, because it will be so much easier when you come to do the transaction, and you shall hopefully achieve a higher sale value.
But that point also links to keeping your foot on the pedal through the process as well. So make sure your figures look good and they're consistent in the run up to the year you decide to sell. However, once you've got an offer accepted, you need to keep your foot on the pedal, maintain your performance, keep your figures up through the sale process, because it's heartbreaking. And we've seen it a number of times where people get an offer accepted, they're kind of popping the champagne corks. That process could take 4 or 5 months, but they effectively stop working. So then when the buyer, or perhaps the buyer's bank, asks for some up-to-date financial information 3, 4, 5 months into the process, to find that those fees have nosedived, and suddenly there's a re-evaluation that takes place, and suddenly they're not going to get 800,000, it's looking more like 650,000. It's horrible. So keeping your foot on the pedal, maintaining that income, maintaining that momentum is critical.
And an interesting aside to that, isn't it? It doesn't mean that you, as the dentist, need to keep working, because what you could do, which we've seen, is people say, well, actually, I don't want to work 5 days a week, so I'm going to go down to 3 days, get an associate in for 2 days. And from us as valuers, it doesn't matter, because we will base ours on a full-time value of dentist anyway. But what you don't want to do is, as you say, sort of keep working 5 days or 4.5 days, whatever it is, but effectively relax so as you are only working 3 days in fee income generation, because then it's really hard to justify, because what people will assume is it's not because you chilled out and relaxed, it's because the fees aren't there. So therefore that means the fees aren't there, so now I'm in trouble. And a bank valuation, what a bank valuation lasts, is it 4 months? I think it was about 4 months, and then it has to be redone again. So the quicker you can get this stuff done and keep your foot going, because as we say, it's not over until the money's in the bank account.
It's funny, we were talking to Ricky Adams in another episode of the podcast, and he was saying that whilst he was in the sale process, he basically discounted that and was just running his business and making decisions based on, if this doesn't go through, we want to be in the best shape possible. And that's a great lesson for anybody who's going to be going through a sale process. Trick yourself into thinking you're not selling. What decisions would you make, and how would you be running your business if you weren't in a sale process?
And don't do things that you wouldn't do. How many times have we seen it? And unfortunately, it's not a super common thing. But when people say, oh, well, what I've done is I've given my staff a 20% pay rise. I've given them a massive Christmas bonus, which has now become contractual.
So, Chris, what would that do to the profit of that
surprisingly
business?
Enough, drives it down. And guess what?
Which impacts the value.
Where's your value? But people don't see that, do they? They sort of think, oh, well, my staff have been moving 20 years.
And I think with lots of these pitfalls, people don't set out to trip themselves up. They don't set out to erode their value, cause problems. They do things because they just don't understand the impact and the consequences of what they, it's like with the pay rise. People think it would be lovely. It'd be lovely to pay people a bit more, give them a bonus or whatever it might be, because they think they're doing a good thing without necessarily understanding the impact that could have on the transaction or the underlying value.
And you can understand, and it's that thing, isn't it? And this is, I suppose, where you need the expertise, is give them a bonus. It's a one-off. It's not contractual. You're not adding the cost base. It's just one-off. It's going to be in your accounts anyway. It is. But unless you know that, you give them a pay rise, and then you're in trouble.
And when you're selling a dental practice, which for the majority of people represents a significant part of their life's work, it's always sad when there's things that people could do and they don't do it, and they don't quite get the end result they could have just by asking a few questions. And hopefully this sort of information will give people some of those sort of tools and tips and tricks so that they get a good outcome for themselves.
And as you say, it's out of ignorance.
And
it's not meant to be rude. It's just the fact that it's not yet their area of expertise. They might have run a really successful and produced a really successful practice. We see guys, don't we, ranging from people who've no idea how they've really made their money to other people who are so focused they can produce a monthly P&L for you, and they know where everything is. but they haven't sold a business.
No.
So it's almost a very different set of skills.
But also, if you think about the first time you do anything, it's a bit clunky. You're kind of learning. You don't really know what's going on. So to do that on a business is risky. So the more informed you can get, the better advice you can get. Hopefully you'd avoid some of these common pitfalls and get a better outcome.
Yeah, brilliant, definitely. So yeah, if you are, listen to this and make sure you don't fall into those holes.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Dentology, where we discuss the business of dentistry. If you like what you heard, please do subscribe where you found this episode. That would be amazing. And also follow us on Instagram.